Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled The Dead Poets Society. Okay, and when I use the word poet, I'm going to refer to it metaphorically, and I intend to present to you 41 military intelligence, clandestine service, murder victims, people who worked, and they all worked for the CIA or British intelligence or military intelligence. All of these 41 murder victims were part of the social engineering or clandestine service surveillance society of poets. When I refer to the word poet, I'm referring to the second definition. I don't mean people who write poems, although some of these people on my list did write poetry. I'm referring to a person who possesses special powers of imagination or expression. And of my list of 41, I'll just do a spoiler alert here. No person could be a better example of possessing special powers of imagination or expression than Peter Sellers, who was done away with in London, England, and Judy Garland, who presented the Wizard of Oz banking documentary in 1939 at age 16 years old. No two actors, singers, were more important in social engineering for British intelligence, military intelligence, and CIA or OSS than were Peter Sellers and Judy Garland. Those two. And they were both murdered in London, England, in close proximity to each other, within a mile and a half of each other. Peter Sellers was done away with at the Dorchester Hotel, which is across the street from Green Park in the Mayflower district of London. It's next door to the Grand Sheraton Hotel, which is adjacent to the Playboy Club and the Church of Scientology Division of Compulsion Analysis, renamed the Process Church, is in the building next door to the Grand Sheraton Hotel, which is next door to the Dorchester Hotel, where Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono and John Lennon and Yoko Ono signed a contract with Alan Klein of New Jersey to manage the music of the Beatles, because they never performed together whilst managed by Alan Klein in the Dorchester Hotel in the dining room. Peter Sellers had a heart attack, I believe, upstairs in his room. And that is right across the street from where Cass Elliot was done away with, in the exact same room that Keith Moon was done away with a few years later. So do you see a pattern here, people? I got the fake wedding reception for Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski is held at the Playboy Club. It's a 2-hour cocktail party on a Friday afternoon on January 20th, 1968. They were never married, okay? It was a fake marriage. They were never married. They didn't spend a honeymoon together. Roman Polanski went to see Diana Ross and the Supremes perform in Piccadilly Circus, I believe. Or maybe it was the Prince Albert Theater. But anyway, he didn't spend time with Sharon Tate on his honeymoon night, which would run a Friday, January 20th, 1968. So it's a staged event, right? Featuring BBC actors and Hollywood actors flown in. You know, like the actors from Valley of the Dolls that Sharon Tate was just finishing up that film. We had Bewitched, the mother-in-law in Dora, Elizabeth Montgomery's fake mother-in-law. She was at the fake wedding reception cocktail party for Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. Her name was Agnes Moorehead, right? And she was there. And she doesn't know who Sharon Tate is. Other might see her around the lot, over in Burbank, Studio City. So I'm going to start my list off with London and England, Sussex, and London specifically. I have 8 murders in England, 6 of which are in London. Then I'm going to fly across the pond to New York, and specifically Manhattan. I want to pay my respects to my loyal New York viewers, I appreciate your interest and loyalty to my channel. All 6 of the murders I'm going to present to you in New York occurred in Manhattan over the last 70 years. Believe me, I can get this list well over 100, but I just wanted to focus mostly on the West Coast, which is my bailiwick, and specifically the San Francisco Bay Area and the CI city known as San Francisco, which has been military intelligence controlled since 1776, when the Spanish built the Presidio Army Base. Before they finished the Mission Church, they finished the Army Base. And of course, Los Angeles, which is code for Hollywood and porn and drug distribution. Because in all of these cities that I'm referring to, London, Manhattan, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, you're going to have drug distribution, you're going to have pornography, you're going to have entertainment, and you're going to have the CIA or military or British intelligence involved, because clandestine services go where addiction is found, and porn and entertainment and drugs are highly addictive. That's why they've been platformed and rolled out and made easy peasy for you to gain access to. All right, so let me just focus the show talking about the poets who were murdered in England, and they are, in no particular chronological order, Judy Garland, who was murdered approximately 1 month before Sharon Tate was murdered in Benedict Canyon at a porn set at Sunbrook Drive, Bella Drive, Angelo View Drive, not Cielo Drive. But I understand for the purposes of your brainwashing, we can call it Cielo Drive. But it's Sunbrook Drive, and the killers would have come and cleaned up from the houses on Sunbrook Drive. They would have walked up the ice plant and taken care of the 3 dogs and the pool boy, removed him from the property, down the hill into one of the 4 or 5 houses on Sunbrook Drive, and then they would have gone up and bayoneted 5 people to death. In the case of the 18-year-old boy heading to a homosexual date, Stephen Perrin, he was shot 4 times with M16 rifles, and I believe at least 2 M16 rifles were used to put him out of business. He was only bayoneted 1 time in his left wrist, which severed his wristwatch band, tossing his watch into the rear seat of his parents' Ambassador Rambler sedan, 2-door. All right. So getting back to London, England, we had Cass Elliot done away with, Judy Garland, Keith Moon done away with in the exact bedroom that Cass Elliot was done away with, Peter Sellers done away with across the street from where Cass Elliot and Keith Moon were done away with at the Dorchester Hotel, which is where Yoko Ono and John Lennon entered into a verbal agreement and a written memorandum of that agreement with Alan Klein, the fake 2nd or 3rd manager of the Beatles. The Beatles were managed by RCA and EMI. They didn't need Alan Klein's help. They didn't need Brian Epstein's help. But in any case, Peter Sellers had a heart attack, I believe, in his room at the Dorchester Hotel, which is less than 80 yards away from where Cass Elliot, heart stopped beating, and Keith Moon's heart stopped beating across the street from the Dorchester Hotel, which is adjacent to the Grand Sheraton Hotel, which is adjacent to the Playboy Club and the Church of Scientology Division of Compulsion Analysis, later rebranded as the Process Church. This is where they held the fake wedding reception cocktail party for Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski at the Playboy Club, which was held on a Friday afternoon, which would be January 20th, 1968. They had a 2-hour cocktail party, which half the guests were British intelligence operatives, and half the guests were BBC actors and Hollywood actors and actresses like Agnes Moorehead, who played the Wicked Witch in this TV show Bewitched with Elizabeth Montgomery, who lived in Benedict Canyon. You should know that Agnes Moorehead also lived in Benedict Canyon below the Sharon Tate murder site. She lived about 1,000 meters away as the crow flies, Agnes Moorehead. So it's natural that she would attend the fake wedding for Sharon Tate. It's the only time I think she ever met her was maybe at the at the buffet over at CBS television studios, or maybe she met her, down at the grocery store in Beverly Hills. But the thing is, Sharon Tate didn't live at the address where she was murdered. But Agnes Moorehead lived on North Roxbury Drive, next door to Ira Gershwin, George Gershwin, Jimmy Stewart, Peter Falk, Lucille Ball, Jack Benny. I can go on with the people. Rosemary Clooney lived on the same street that Agnes Moorehead lived. Anyway, she participated in London, England at the fake, phony wedding reception. You do know that Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate were not married. That's a made-for-television fake marriage. They didn't even spend their honeymoon together. Roman Polanski went to watch Diana Ross and the Supremes perform either at the Royal Prince Albert Theater or at Piccadilly Circus. I'm not sure which theater. The Supremes were performing that Friday night. You could Google that. January 20th, 1968. The Supremes and Diana Ross were in town. Roman Polanski went to their show after his wedding reception / cocktail party. That's why I'm calling the Peter Sellers heart attack a murder, because it occurred within 80 yards of Cass Elliot and Keith Moon, Peter Sellers, the fake wedding for Roman Polanski. It's within 100 yards away. Okay? So I'm calling those all British intelligence supervised murders. That's 3. 3 murders, 4 incidents. Nobody died at the Sharon Tate reception that I'm aware of. But I don't think she knew too many of the guests. They were all brought in and casted from Central Casting. Probably the Tavistock Institute. All right, so I'm up to 3 murders in the case of Peter Sellers, Cass Elliot, Keith Moon. I'm going to then add Brian Jones, who was done away with in a swimming pool 100 kilometers south of London in Sussex. Before that, we had the murder of Brian Epstein in his bed, again in Sussex, in close proximity to where Brian Jones lived. And so that's 5 murders. Then we had Jimi Hendrix done away with near St. John's Regency Park Armory for British Royal Army. That's where Paul McCartney lived, at 7 Cavendish Avenue. That's where Amy Winehouse lived nearby, the Regency St. John's Park area, Camden, North London. I got Amy Winehouse. I got Jimi Hendrix being murdered, done away with in the same general area. Amy Winehouse, look, I understand you can say it was a slow burn. It's not too different than the 5G smart grid radio frequency that I'm being subjected to. But people were well aware that she had a problem, and they didn't do anything to stop it. So I'm calling that a deliberate on purpose murder of Amy Winehouse, murdered and done away with at age 27. What a tragedy. All these deaths are tragedies. Peter Sellers, Judy Garland. Judy Garland and Peter Sellers are the number 1 and 2 social engineers of all time in the history of film and television. Those two, and performing on stage. Judy Garland brought us The Wizard of Oz, a banking documentary in September 1939. At age 16, Judy Garland presented to us all that there's no such thing as a Wizard of Oz. There is no broomstick flying convent of the Sacred Heart Order nuns. There are no flying monkeys. That's all in your brain. It's a psychops. If you believe that there's banking and that you believe they're closed on Sunday, you've been punked. Okay? There's a little old man on a stepladder pulling levers. The little dog Toto, Dorothy Gale's dog, that was Dorothy's name, Dorothy Gale, with her ruby slippers, which were silver slippers in the book, turned ruby in the Hollywood film presentation, telling you, laughing in your face, there's no such thing as bankers. There's no such thing. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Close your eyes and dream your way home, because that's the situation we find ourselves today with digital central bank currency. It's all a psychops. Ignore bankers. Ignore politicians. Ignore people on television. Ignore the people in films. They're socially engineered, controlled, compromised people following a script, or else they get killed. Look at this. They whacked Peter Sellers. They whacked Cass Elliot, who had a great voice. They whacked Judy Garland, the little girl with the big voice. They whacked Amy Winehouse, the little girl with the big voice. These are important socially engineering actors, crisis actors. Brian Epstein, the fake manager of the Beatles. The Beatles were managed by RCA and EMI, not Brian Epstein. He had zero control over the Beatles. And the Beatles had zero control over their music, which God knows if it even was their music. I think it's the Tavistock's music, Tavistock Institute's music. Anyway, Brian Epstein done away with in Sussex. Paul Jones of the Rolling Stones, done away with. He founded the Rolling Stones, and he was done away with in a swimming pool in Sussex. Cass Elliot, Peter Sellers, Keith Moon, all done away with in Mayfair district of London. That's 5. Then I'm going to throw in a couple you may not know. Christina DeSantis, the younger sister of Ron DeSantis, the fake governor of Florida, she was murdered in London while she was engaged to a London banker. Oh, yes, she was. So, to summarize my deaths in England, merry old England, let's talk about Brian Epstein, Judy Garland, Christina DeSantis, Brian Jones, Amy Winehouse, Cass Elliot, Keith Moon, Peter Sellers. That's 8 homicides in England, 6 of which happened in the city of London. All right. Now let me move on to my New York audience, my respectful New York audience that I greatly appreciate your loyalty and viewership. I have 6 homicides to discuss, all people working for clandestine services, all people who were controlled and compromised, all murdered in the city of Manhattan, New York. Believe me, I can expand this list out into the hundreds if I go out to Bronx and Queens and Yonkers, Long Island, but stay with me, New Yorkers, because my main concentration is going to be San Francisco and Los Angeles. But you're going to find a lot of New Yorkers getting murdered in San Francisco and Los Angeles, okay? So this list of 6 will be expanded when I get out to the West Coast, City by the Bay, CIA San Francisco, which has been a CIA compound, military intelligence compound since 1776, when the Spanish completed the army base known as the Presidio, which became home later to Dianne Goldman Feinstein, and Nancy Pelosi and her drunkard husband, Paul Pelosi, who cannot keep his Porsche Carrera on the highway. He has a problem driving sports cars. He's had that problem since age 16. He's 83 years old now. He still has that problem. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that in New York, in chronological order, I'm going to start with the murder of Frank Olson, who was a resident of Maryland but driven into Manhattan and checked into a room on the 13th floor of the Statler Hilton Hotel. He was 43 years old. He worked for the United States Army Biological Weapons Laboratory, Camp Detrick, renamed Fort Detrick. He was thrown out of the window on the 13th floor down to the sidewalk on November 28, 1953. Dead as a doornail, Frank Olson. He was involved with Operation Sea Spray in San Francisco in 1950. We have Operation Sea Spray going on today. It's called Operation Chemtrails. It's 10,000 times worse than the Operation Sea Spray that Frank Olson was involved with. In any case, Frank Olson, from my research, appears to be wanting to resign from the United States Army and CIA, and he personally met with Sidney Gottlieb and expressed his desires to resign, and then he got thrown out of the 13th floor of the Statler Hilton Hotel. The key word there to remember, people, is Hilton, Conrad Hilton. He's the one that hosted Fidel Castro's prime minister offices in Havana, Cuba. He's the one that hosted the Bed-In for Peace for John Lennon and Yoko Ono in Amsterdam, Holland, at a Hilton Hotel. He's the one that hosts the Lockheed CIA annual Christmas party at the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel, where Buzz Aldrin was confronted by a crisis actor who I forgot his name, Seibel, Bart Seibel, I think. Anyway, that's a made-for-television Apollo 11 psych ops, again performed at a Conrad Hilton hotel in Beverly Hills. So we got Havana, Cuba for Fidel Castro. We've got Manhattan, New York, Statler Hilton Hotel used to murder Frank Olson. We've got the Bed-In for Peace in Amsterdam for John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I've got the Beverly Hills Hilton Hotel for hosting Lockheed, which is the #1 CIA operator for technical surveillance. That includes the SR-71 spy plane, the U-2 spy plane. That would involve, Francis Gary Powers. That would involve the 5G grid, the smart zones, the satellites, the 5G satellites, the surveillance satellites above, all supervised by Lockheed, who has their annual party at the Hilton Hotel, Beverly Hills. All right, my second murder in Manhattan, New York is Jerzy Kosinski. He died at age 57. He allegedly committed suicide. How many people do you know drink a case of vodka, then put a plastic bag over their head and tie it with a love knot and then suffocate themselves, right? And he wrote the script for Being There, which starred Peter Sellers. Jerzy Kosinski from Poland, CIA operative, best friends with Roman Polanski and Abigail Folger's control agent, Wojtek Frykowski, the three Polish Jewish men who worked for CIA in Manhattan, New York. And Abigail Folger was affiliated with the Robert Kennedy presidential candidacy in Manhattan, as was Jerzy Kosinski, Roman Polanski, Wojtek Frykowski, working out of the Bookmart, the Gotham Bookmart, which was a part of Columbia University benefacting. And Jerzy Kosinski allegedly wrote the script for Being There. Who knows if it's true or not. Anyway, he was murdered in Manhattan at age 57. That was on May 3rd, 1991. Again, Frank Olson thrown out of the Hilton Hotel on November 28th, 1953. The next murder that I've got is the murder of John Lennon. You might have heard of John Lennon. He was a social engineer with the Beatles. He was murdered at the Dakota in Manhattan, across the street from Central Park, on December 8, 1980. He was murdered, I believe, by Jose Perdomo, who came from Havana, Cuba, in close proximity to the Hilton Hotel. Jose Perdomo, who's friends with Frank Sturgis, a.k.a. Frank Fiorini. And I'll bet he knows Jose Menendez. I'll bet he does. They all came out of Santiago and Havana, Cuba. Fidel Castro, Jeffrey Bezos, his stepfather, where he got his name, Miguel Bezos, he came out of Santiago, Cuba. Jose Perdomo, Fidel Castro, Miguel Bezos, Jose Perdomo, and Jose Menendez all came out of Havana and Santiago, Cuba. You think that's a coincidence? They all work for CIA, which means Jeffrey Bezos works for CIA. His name is Jorgensen. Jeffrey Bezos' name is Jorgensen. His father was Ted Jorgensen, who owns a bicycle store in Santa Fe, New Mexico. No, he's in Arizona. He's in Arizona. I forgot the town. He's in either Phoenix or another town. Anyway, my point is, Jeffrey Bezos is really Jorgensen. That's what it read on his birth certificate. Jorgensen. He went to Princeton. He worked at Bankers Trust Company, New York. He doesn't know anything about selling books on the internet. All right. What I want to tell you is that the next murder I got is Paul Castellano. Paul Castellano was murdered December 16th, 1985. He was the head of the Gambino crime family. When I say Gambino crime family, I mean CIA operation of drug distribution in Manhattan and Brooklyn, New York. Paul Castellano was 70 years old when he was shot down by Gladio teams of 3, and I believe there were a minimum of 4 teams of 3 that were assigned to the assassination of Paul Castellano and his driver, Thomas Bilotti, age 45. Thomas Bilotti was recently named underboss for Paul Castellano, but since he also was murdered in gunshot blaze at 5:26 p.m. at Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, east side of the park, Central Park, I'm telling you that he was no longer the underboss. And I'm also telling you that John Gotti would not have the authority to do this hit. This hit is above the pay grade for John Gotti. he's going to be the scapegoat, fake go-to guy for the Paul Castellano. Because the people who murdered Paul Castellano are the same people that murdered his banker, Michele Sindona, in a women's prison with a cup of cyanide-laced cappuccino. So I'm not going to talk about Michele Sindona, but the people who killed Roberto Calfi in London, England, which I didn't count, you Londoners, the people who killed Roberto Calfi in London, the people who killed Michele Sindona in Italy at a women's prison, those are the people who killed Paul Castellano in Manhattan at the Sparks Steakhouse as he was getting out of his car, along with Thomas Bilotti. Then we have the most recent murder in New York, which was Thomas H. Lee, which was this year. Okay, it was this year. It was February 23rd, 2023, on the 6th floor of his office. Thomas H. Lee, a money laundering private banker, at 767 Fifth Avenue on the 6th floor, blew his brains out. I'm going to say that was a murder. He was 78 years old. 78 years old. There's really no reason to commit suicide if you're a billionaire private banker. There is lots of reasons to get done away with if you're, look, Roberto Calfi was hung by an orange rope with a love knot at age 62. Michele Sindona, private banker, elite status, he was done away with age 66. William Egan Colby was done away with at age 76. He was a CI director and ran Operation Phoenix in Vietnam. He was 76. So Thomas Lee sort of fits into his category, being murdered in Manhattan, New York on February 23rd, 2023, age 78. There hasn't been a single update on that murder-suicide yet. So, okay, so Manhattan, I got Frank Olson, I got Jerzy Kosinski, I got John Lennon, I got Thomas Bilotti, the driver for Paul Castellano, and I got Thomas H. Lee, murdered this year on 5th Avenue, New York, on the 6th floor. That is 6 homicides in Manhattan. All right. Let me see how I'm doing on time, folks. 27 minutes in. All right. Probably have to do a separate video on this. Yeah, I will do part 2, which will be the West Coast, San Francisco and Los Angeles. I've got 27 homicides to discuss. Enjoy your London and your Sussex and your Manhattan, New York homicides. Have a great day. Please share my videos because I am shadow banned. Take care.